Was it hot this summer and you realized that you needed to plant a shade tree in your yard? A lot of people ask us, when can I plant a tree? And someone once told me that you could plant a tree anytime there is an R in that month. So you think about it. January, February, March, April, not May, not June, not July or August, but September, October, November, and December. So that gives you kind of an idea, and it's an easy trick to remember when you can plant trees. Now typically we don't plant trees, say mid-December through mid-February, just because it's so cold and the ground might be frozen. So that really limits us to spring and fall. Now within those, there are some trees that you may not want to plant at certain times. A lot of times you don't want to plant your evergreen trees in the fall because they can dry out in the wintertime. Really, fall is the best time to plant your deciduous trees, and then spring is the best time to plant your evergreen trees or your bare root trees. Here we're going to plant a black gum tree, and we chose this tree because it is a deciduous shade tree that we want to plant in this area. We previously had a ginkgo biloba, and we think that it might have gotten too much moisture in this area. So we're going to plant this a little bit high, but also black gums or tupelo trees do like a little bit more moisture. We're going to dig our hole twice as wide as what the root ball is, and that's so that we're really breaking up that surrounding soil to encourage those roots to get out into that environment. The other thing is, if you have heavy clay soils, you want to deglaze it basically by breaking up that clay just with the edge of your shovel. Again, that will allow those roots to get out there. If you don't, you can create a teacup effect where the roots actually just stay right there in the hole that you've dug. It also used to be suggested to amend the soil, but you really don't want to do that anymore. The rules have changed a little bit, and they found that it's better to backfill with the native soil that you've excavated. That's because if you make this too perfect of an environment, the roots are never going to branch out and go into the native soil. So again, we've got our excavated soil over here that we will backfill. And of course, before you do any digging, you want to make sure that you've called Okie to mark any lines that might be buried in your soil, as well as you want to protect any of your own irrigation lines. Now that we have our hole and it appears to be large enough for our root ball, we're going to measure it. And a good way to do that is to take your shovel and lean it up against the handle, up against the root ball, and kind of mark it with your finger, and then take that into the hole so you can easily measure the depth of your root ball and measure how big your hole is and whether it's appropriately sized or not. If it's too shallow, you'll want to dig a little bit deeper, but it's really best to dig a more shallow hole because you can always dig a little bit more rather than to dig too deep and have to backfill. Because as that soil compacts, that backfilled soil underneath the root ball compacts, your tree will actually sink down a lot. And a lot of times we'll lose trees because there's too much moisture and they're planted too low. So it's best to plant a tree higher than it is to plant it too low. Now that we know our hole is large enough, we're going to go ahead and start to take our tree out of our pot. And this is rather a larger tree to try to plant by yourself, but it can be hard to get it out of the pot. One of the best ways is to kind of roll it, gently roll it, and put your knee into it. And that will separate the tree from the pot. Now if I can get some help pulling the pot, the tree should come out fairly easy. There we go. And we're just going to lift this into our hole now. So now that we have our tree in place, this is our opportunity to look at the roots. If there's any small roots that might be circling, you want to make sure to cut these. This root looks like it's good, it's going outwards. Also, the roots don't look too much like they've been circling in the pot for too long, so they really look good. But if you do see that, and it doesn't hurt to go ahead and score the roots a little bit anyway, just take a kitchen knife or an X-Acto knife and kind of cut those vertically around the tree. It's basically like root pruning and what you would do on a herbaceous plant as well. Now, the other thing that you want to think about is the orientation of your tree. You might look at which side of the tree looks the best, because now's the opportunity to be able to rotate your tree and shift it so that the best side is facing the direction you want it to. Once we have the tree oriented and facing the right direction, we also want to ensure that it is straight up and not slanted. And now we're ready to backfill. A lot of times when you buy a tree from the nursery, it'll come with a stake attached to it, and really this is just for nursery purposes. At this point, we're going to remove this stake and go ahead and put in a couple of T-posts to provide it with more support. And a lot of times people make the mistake of putting the wires too tight, the guy wires too tight around the tree, and you don't want to do this. This is simply just to help assist the tree in heavy winds, but you want the tree to flex a little bit in those winds and the light breezes. I always think of trees as like having abs. So if you don't work your muscles, then as soon as you take these wires off, that tree is going to snap in the slightest wind. This way it will actually build up caliper and make it stronger, as well as the roots stronger to anchor that tree. We have our stakes in, and now we're going to put our guide wires to the tree. And a lot of times people will use wire or hose around that wire along the tree, but we prefer these flat straps. It just is a little bit smoother on the bark of the tree. We're going to wrap this around the interior of the tree. We're going to try to find an area where there's not too many branches, and we're going to tie this with some twine. Again, we use twine instead of wire because it doesn't wear on the tree quite as much. We're just going to tie a knot in that. So once we have that, we're going to pull it tight and then just tie it around our stake here. I need to cut that. Once we've cut that, we're going to tie it around our stake to secure it. The last thing that we're going to do now is add mulch, and you can see when we backfilled our tree, we didn't put any topsoil on top of the root ball, and that's because we don't want to bury the root ball. We want to make sure that existing root flare is still present. If we were to bury this, that will lead to disease and rot and decay, and that's not a good thing. We've also created a tree well with the backfill soil, and this will create a reservoir, so when we water, it will actually allow that water to percolate down into the root ball. And we're going to mimic this contour a little bit with our mulch. We want to put about 2 to 3 inches of mulch, but we're going to taper that down as we get closer to that root, the trunk. You can see we've recreated that tree well and ensured that there's no mulch up against the bark of the tree. And so now we're just going to water it in. As we water this in, we want to provide about 1 inch of water on a new tree about every week to 10 days. And you'll do this until the tree goes dormant. In the winter time, if we have had a month-long spell without any precipitation, either rain or snow, then we're going to want to give it a drink too. But it doesn't require much water because it's not actively growing with leaves and everything. We won't worry about fertilizing it until late winter, early spring when it's flushing out, and soon we're going to have shade in the summertime.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.